The phone rang. It wasn't an unusual sound, but the timing was all wrong. Sarah Miller was sitting at her kitchen table in her small but cozy apartment, sipping coffee as she scrolled through emails. It had been a normal Tuesday morning, or at least, that's what she thought. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an unfamiliar number. Frowning, she let it ring out, thinking it might be another telemarketer. But before she could return to her screen, her phone buzzed again. Same number. Same interruption. Curiosity got the best of her. She pressed the green button and put the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her heart was suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't explain. "Hi, is this Sarah Miller?" The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, yet urgent. "Yes, this is she." "Who's calling?" Sarah sat up straighter, sensing something wasn't quite right. "This is Laura Jennings with Continental Mortgage. I'm calling regarding the mortgage loan application we processed in your name." The words hung in the air like a weight, heavy and incomprehensible. "Mortgage loan?" Sarah echoed, her voice suddenly shaky. "I didn't apply for any mortgage." Laura's voice remained calm, but Sarah could hear a hint of unease. "I understand this may be confusing, but the loan was approved for $1 million. We've sent several notifications to your address, but we've yet to hear back. Is there a chance you didn't receive them?" Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Wait. Hold on," she said, her mind spinning in circles. "Are you telling me someone took out a loan in my name?" "Correct. The application was processed and approved. Our records show your signature as part of the paperwork. You were listed as the primary borrower." "No, this isn't possible." Sarah's mind raced as panic started to settle in. She wasn't one to act rashly. She always checked her credit reports, paid bills on time, and had even put a freeze on her credit a few years ago to avoid this kind of situation. How could something like this happen? "Ms. Miller, I understand this is a lot to process, but we need to resolve this immediately. If you didn't apply for the loan, we need you to come in and start a fraud investigation." Sarah's stomach dropped. No, she murmured, barely able to comprehend what she was hearing. "I didn't apply for a loan. I don't even want a loan." "I understand, Ms. Miller," Laura said, her tone softening, but the words were still matter-of-fact. "In that case, we'll need you to come down to our office to file a report. The sooner we can get this handled, the better." The line went quiet as Sarah tried to process the information. She wasn't sure if she should be more worried about her financial future or about the stranger who had used her name for this mysterious loan. She'd heard of identity theft before, but she never thought it would happen to her. And certainly not at this scale. "Okay," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be there as soon as I can." "Great. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Miller. I'll send you the details for our office address and paperwork to your email. Be sure to bring a government-issued ID with you." "Thank you," Sarah managed to mutter before hanging up. She sat there, staring at her phone. What just happened? What did this mean for her? The first thing that hit her was disbelief. Then came fear. And finally, a gut-wrenching sense of betrayal. Someone, somewhere, had taken her identity, and the consequences could be life-altering. Who would do this? Sarah muttered to herself as she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The thought kept circling in her mind, like a question with no answer. Her father. The thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. Could he have done this? She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, and their last conversation had been unpleasant, to say the least. He'd always been a bit reckless with money, living beyond his means, borrowing money from anyone he could, and always avoiding the consequences. But a $1 million mortgage? That seemed extreme, even for him. Sarah shook her head. No, it couldn't be him. But then what if it was? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed possible. Her father was a master manipulator. He had always been able to talk his way out of trouble. He'd been the one who taught her how to forge a signature when she was a kid, a skill she'd never really used after high school. But still, the possibility lingered. "Come on, Sarah," she muttered under her breath. "Get it together." She stood up abruptly and grabbed her purse. The office. She needed to get to the mortgage company and get some answers. But before she left, she took one last look at her phone. It was then that she noticed something odd, a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "You should be more careful, Sarah. If you want to protect your future, you'll have to act fast." Sarah's blood ran cold. What was going on? Who was this? And why did it feel like she was already in over her head? She didn't have time to dwell on it. The clock was ticking, and her future was hanging in the balance. She had to go to that office. But the sinking feeling in her gut told her this was just the beginning of something much bigger. What would you do if someone took out a massive loan in your name and you didn't even know it was happening? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah Miller had always considered herself a practical person. She believed in the importance of hard work, responsibility, and keeping things simple. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, those values had been ingrained in her from an early age. Life wasn't glamorous for Sarah, but it had been steady. She'd always known exactly what she wanted, a stable life with no surprises. But as steady as life had been, it hadn't always been easy. Her parents, John and Linda Miller, had always been at odds. Her father, a charming yet reckless man, had a history of making bad decisions, both financially and personally. Her mother, on the other hand, was practical and careful to a fault. Sarah could still remember the nights when her parents would argue late into the evening, their voices rising until they were muffled by the walls of the house. Her father's constant debts and broken promises had worn down her mother until one day, the arguing stopped altogether. Her mother, always the quiet one, had quietly filed for divorce when Sarah was in high school, and from that day forward, Sarah had been the one to hold everything together. As a teenager, she'd assumed the role of peacemaker, trying to manage her father's antics and calm her mother's nerves. But when her father moved out, Sarah was left with the job of balancing her mother's finances and maintaining peace in the house. It wasn't easy for a 16-year-old girl, but Sarah took it all in stride. The years that followed weren't much easier. Sarah worked 2 part-time jobs throughout high school and college to help her mother make ends meet. She'd always felt like the responsible one, while her father drifted from one bad decision to another. But it wasn't until she got her first real job after college that she realized how much she'd sacrificed in the name of responsibility. At 23, Sarah landed a marketing job in Chicago, a city she'd always dreamed of living in. It was the fresh start she needed, away from the small-town constraints of her upbringing. She moved into a modest apartment and began to build her life, leaving behind the weight of her past. Her father, though, was a different story. He had a knack for showing up at the most inconvenient times. When Sarah had first moved to Chicago, he'd come to visit under the guise of wanting to reconnect. But it quickly became clear that he wasn't interested in mending their relationship, he was just looking for money. He had never really been a father in the traditional sense, always more interested in his next scheme or business venture than in supporting his daughter. Sarah had learned to keep her distance, even though she'd always felt a pang of guilt for not being there for him when he needed her most. Still, over the years, she had tried to maintain some semblance of a relationship with him. They spoke on the phone every couple of months, but their conversations were rarely personal. Most of the time, he'd ask about her job, her love life, and then quickly change the subject to his latest financial troubles. Sarah had gotten used to this pattern and had learned to keep her emotions in check, compartmentalizing her feelings and focusing on her own life. But now, with the news of the mortgage fraud hanging over her head, those feelings she'd buried for years started to resurface. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "You've always been so serious, Sarah. You need to loosen up, take risks. It's all about living in the moment." She could almost hear him now, his voice tinged with a mix of charm and reckless abandon. It had always annoyed her, how easily he could dismiss responsibility. She'd spent her whole life learning how to manage her finances, how to build a future. She was proud of the fact that she was independent, proud that she had escaped the chaos of her childhood. But now it felt like everything she'd worked for could be taken away in an instant. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing again. She looked at the screen, expecting another call from the mortgage company or maybe a message from her best friend, Jenny. But it was neither. The text came from an unknown number. "I hope you're ready for the truth, Sarah. Things aren't as they seem. Your father's mess is deeper than you realize. You've been dragged into something much bigger than you know. Be careful." Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message again, a sense of unease settling over her. Who was this? And how did they know about her father? Was this just a prank? Or was it someone involved in whatever scheme her father had gotten himself tangled in? Her mind raced as she thought about the possibilities. Could her father really have done this? Could he have taken out a $1 million loan in her name without her knowledge? The very thought of it made her stomach turn. She had always tried to keep her distance from him. But if this was really his doing, she was now trapped in the middle of it. It wasn't just her future on the line anymore. It was her reputation, her credit, and maybe even her safety. She couldn't sit around and wait for answers. She needed to take control of the situation. Sarah grabbed her keys and stormed out of her apartment, heading straight for the mortgage company. She needed to understand what had happened, and she needed to figure out how to protect herself. But as she walked through the door of Continental Mortgage later that day, the gravity of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just dealing with an administrative error or a misunderstanding. This was fraud. And it was her name on the line. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped up to the counter, trying to steady her nerves. The clerk behind the desk looked up, surprised to see her standing there. "Can I help you?" the woman asked politely, though Sarah could tell that her eyes were scanning Sarah up and down, probably wondering why she seemed so tense. "I'm here about a loan that was taken out in my name," Sarah said, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "I need to file a fraud report." The clerk nodded, clearly used to this type of thing. "I'll get the paperwork for you, but you'll need to meet with one of our fraud specialists to discuss it further." Sarah barely heard her. She was too lost in her thoughts. What kind of mess had her father gotten her into? And how would she ever get out? Sarah sat nervously in the waiting area of Continental Mortgage, her foot tapping restlessly against the tiled floor. The sleek, modern office felt sterile, the white walls and bright fluorescent lighting doing nothing to calm her racing mind. The receptionist had directed her to a small corner of the room where she had been instructed to wait for a fraud specialist. The seconds felt like minutes, and every tick of the clock made her stomach tighten even more. The text she had received earlier still lingered in her thoughts. Who was it from? And why were they warning her? It seemed too specific to be a coincidence. Whoever sent it knew something about her father, something she didn't. It wasn't just the loan that had her on edge. It was everything that had come with it. The idea that her name had been used without her knowledge in such a large transaction was terrifying enough. But the mysterious text was a new level of fear, one that had a sinister edge. What did they mean by "your father's mess is deeper than you realize"? The door to the back office opened with a soft click, and Sarah's attention snapped to the figure who entered. A woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a sharp business suit, stepped into the waiting area. Her name tag read Jennifer Lawson, fraud specialist. "Ms. Miller?" Jennifer asked, her voice warm but professional. "If you'll follow me, please." Sarah stood up, forcing her feet to move despite the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. She followed Jennifer down a narrow hallway and into a small office. The walls were lined with files and paperwork, and the desk was cluttered with documents. There were no windows in the room, but the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was oddly soothing, even as Sarah's nerves frayed. Jennifer motioned for Sarah to sit across from her. As Sarah did, Jennifer slid a folder across the desk, its contents spilling out in front of her. "So, Ms. Miller," Jennifer began, her expression serious, "I've reviewed the application and supporting documents, and unfortunately, it seems we have a serious issue here." Sarah's heart thudded in her chest. She had hoped for a simple mistake, an error that could be quickly corrected, but the look on Jennifer's face told her that wasn't the case. "Whoever took out the loan in your name had all the right information," Jennifer continued. "They knew your full name, your social security number, and even details about your previous addresses. The signature on the paperwork is a match for yours, but we've confirmed through your identity protection services that you didn't authorize any such transaction." Sarah swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Someone forged my signature." Jennifer nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, and based on the amount, $1 million, it's clear this isn't some small-time scam. This is big, Ms. Miller. It's possible the individual or group behind this could have done this with other identities as well." Sarah's mind spun, the room suddenly feeling smaller. $1 million. Her hands trembled as she reached for the glass of water on the desk, taking a long sip to calm herself. "Do you have any idea who could be behind this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't help but think of her father. Her mind returned to the text message she'd received earlier, that cryptic warning. Was it someone trying to get her attention? Someone who knew more than she did? Jennifer tapped a pen against the folder, her gaze drifting as if weighing her words carefully. "We've seen similar patterns of fraud in the past, usually tied to organized crime or larger syndicates that specialize in identity theft. However, given your situation, it seems more personal." "Personal?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "What do you mean?" "Well, based on the information we have," Jennifer continued, leaning forward slightly, "the person behind this has a very specific connection to you. Whoever they are, they clearly have knowledge of your past, your history, your family. And it seems like they might be trying to frame you or manipulate you in some way." Sarah's mind reeled. Her father had always been a wild card. He had spent most of his life making reckless decisions, lying, cheating, borrowing from anyone who would lend him money. He had a network of people who wouldn't hesitate to use his name and connections to get what they wanted. "I have to ask," Jennifer said, "do you have any reason to believe someone in your life, maybe someone close to you, might be involved in this?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Her instinct screamed yes. Her father's shadow loomed large, casting a pall over every decision she'd made. But there was more to it than just him. The text, the fraud, the mystery, it felt like a web that had been spun around her, pulling her deeper with each passing moment. I think it might be someone close to me," Sarah admitted slowly, her voice shaky. "But I'm not sure who. My father, he's been in and out of trouble for years. He's always been in debt, always had some new scheme. But a $1 million mortgage? I never imagined anything like this." Jennifer nodded, her expression sympathetic. "That's the thing with fraud like this. The people behind it are experts at using your past, your relationships, to get what they want. But you have to understand, this is not just a case of stolen credit or identity. This could lead to something much more dangerous, and I need you to take this seriously." Sarah nodded slowly, her stomach twisting. The words were sinking in, but they weren't fully registering. The possibility of it being her father, or someone connected to him, was too overwhelming to fully grasp. The deeper she got into this, the more questions seemed to arise. "Is there anything else I need to do?" Sarah asked, her voice determined now, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Jennifer pushed a stack of forms across the desk. "These are the documents you'll need to sign to start the investigation. We'll also need you to provide any other information you have that might help us track down the person behind this. And I recommend freezing your credit immediately to prevent further damage." Sarah picked up the pen and signed her name, her hand steady despite the storm raging inside her. She had no choice now. This was real. Someone had stolen her identity. Someone was using her name in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. And whoever it was, they had just pulled her into a mess that she might never get out of. The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. The weight of the fraud, combined with the mystery of the text message, had left her exhausted and on edge. Each time she checked her phone, she half expected another cryptic warning, or worse, more news of financial destruction. Her mind kept circling back to the same question: who is behind this? Despite everything, life had to go on. Her job at the marketing firm in Chicago was demanding, and her manager, David, had been growing more impatient with her distracted performance. Sarah had always been a dedicated employee, but lately, she felt like her world was falling apart, and it was becoming harder to compartmentalize the chaos. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, sifting through the pile of papers Jennifer had handed her at Continental Mortgage. Most of them were formal documents that needed her attention, requests for more personal information to verify her identity. But one paper stood out. It was a list of transactions that had been linked to the fraudulent loan, a series of charges on her account that had never been authorized. Sarah's fingers trembled as she scanned the list. There were purchases she didn't recognize, large amounts of money transferred to various accounts. What caught her attention was a name. Among the transfers was a payment to an account that, to her shock, had the name of someone she knew. A name she hadn't thought about in years. Her mind immediately flashed back to her time in college, when she had briefly dated a man named Peter Grant. They hadn't stayed together long, but their relationship had ended on good terms. Peter had always been a bit of a free spirit, a tech guy with a knack for business ventures and a desire to make quick money. Sarah had never thought much of him after their breakup, but now, seeing his name linked to a fraudulent transaction, a chill ran down her spine. She hadn't heard from Peter in over 2 years. Why would he be involved in this? Her phone buzzed, pulling her away from her thoughts. It was a message from Jenny, her best friend. "Hey, are you free tonight? We need to talk. Something's off with your situation. I have a feeling we're missing something. Call me when you get a chance." Sarah's heart raced. She hadn't shared everything with Jenny, but the fact that her friend seemed to know something was off made her feel even more on edge. She quickly tapped out a reply. "I'm free later. I need to meet with you. Can you come over in an hour?" She stared at the list again. Peter's name stared back at her from the page, an eerie reminder of her past. Sarah wasn't sure how Peter was involved, but she knew one thing for certain. The deeper she dug, the more tangled everything became. An hour later, Jenny arrived at Sarah's apartment, her face painted with concern. "I've been thinking about this all day, Sarah," Jenny said as soon as she walked in. "You're dealing with something much bigger than you realize. I don't think this was just some random scam. Someone's been watching you, and not just in the way we thought." Sarah didn't waste time. She handed Jenny the papers, pointing to the transaction that had her so unsettled. "This is the link I found. Peter Grant's name is on one of the transfers. I don't know why, but I think he might be involved." Jenny squinted at the document. "Peter Grant? Wait, isn't he that guy you dated in college? The one who was always into tech stuff?" "Exactly. I haven't talked to him in years," Sarah said, her voice tight. "But seeing his name like this, I don't know what to make of it." Jenny paused, her mind clearly racing. "You don't think he would do something like this, do you? I mean, you're talking about identity theft and possibly organized crime. This could be way beyond him." "I don't know," Sarah admitted, rubbing her temples. "But this isn't just some mistake anymore. Someone is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and it's personal. It feels like the more I uncover, the less I understand." Jenny leaned forward. "Sarah, we need to think this through carefully. You're being dragged into something much darker, and I don't want you going after Peter alone. If he's really involved, You need to be prepared for what you might find. I know, Sarah said, looking at the papers again. But I can't just ignore it. I need answers. If he's in this, I have to confront him. Jenny sighed, clearly torn. Fine, but promise me you won't go off half-cocked. This is dangerous. Whoever is behind this fraud doesn't want you involved, and we don't even know who else they might be targeting. I'll be careful, Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced she could be. This had become bigger than just her. Someone had stolen her identity, and her past was now catching up with her in the most frightening way. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of her control. The fraud case was growing more complex by the day, and she had no clear path to follow. But as much as she wanted to run from it, she knew that wasn't an option. The stakes were too high. This wasn't just about her finances anymore. It was about her safety, her future, and the people she loved. Later that evening, Sarah sat at her desk and typed out a message to Peter, her hands shaking as she composed the words. Peter, I need to talk to you. There are some things that don't add up, and I think you might know something about what's going on. Call me when you get this. She hit send, then sat back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just opened a door that she couldn't close. The next time she saw Peter, the answers she got might change everything. But would they be the answers she wanted? The days following Sarah's message to Peter were agonizingly slow. The minutes stretched into hours, and her anxiety only grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was brewing behind the scenes. The connection to Peter, an ex from her past, had thrown her off balance. Was he truly involved, or was it just a coincidence? The uncertainty gnawed at her as she moved through her daily routine, unable to focus fully on work or anything else. Her phone buzzed one morning as she sat in her car, parked outside her office. The text was from Peter. Sarah, we need to talk. Meet me at Vino's tonight, 7 p.m. It's about the money. Trust me, you're not going to like what I have to say. Her stomach dropped. The words felt like a warning. Something was definitely off, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Despite the trepidation crawling up her spine, she knew she had no choice but to go. The cryptic tone of Peter's message made it clear that he was involved, but how far did it go? And what exactly was he going to tell her? By 7 p.m., Sarah found herself sitting at a small corner table in Vino's, a cozy wine bar with a dim atmosphere, perfect for intimate discussions. She hadn't been to the place in years, but the familiarity of it brought back memories of the simpler times when she and Peter had briefly dated. As she sat there, fiddling nervously with her glass of water, her mind replayed the worst-case scenarios. Had Peter become involved in something illegal? Had he manipulated her without her realizing? Was he in deep with people who were much more dangerous than him? A few moments later, the door opened, and Peter walked in. He looked exactly as she remembered him, tall, with shaggy brown hair and an easy grin that once charmed her, but now seemed almost out of place. His casual jeans and jacket gave him a relaxed appearance, but there was a tense energy about him that made Sarah uneasy. He didn't seem like the carefree guy she had known. This was a man who carried some kind of burden, and it showed. Peter spotted her immediately and walked over, pulling out the chair to sit down without waiting for an invitation. There was an awkward pause before he spoke. Sarah, he said softly, his voice laced with a mix of guilt and concern. You probably didn't want to hear from me again, but I didn't know who else to turn to. Sarah stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, and she found herself struggling to breathe. You're right, I didn't, she said coolly, her voice tight. But I have to admit, I'm curious. Why the hell is your name on a $1 million loan taken out in my name? And why didn't you just tell me you were involved in this from the start? Peter ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. He hesitated before speaking again. Look, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I swear I didn't mean for it to get this far. But I got involved with some people I shouldn't have, and it got out of hand. I never thought they'd come after you." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Who? Who are you talking about? Peter leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There's a group, actually. They run a thing in the city. Dark web stuff, money laundering, identity theft. They prey on people like me who've made bad choices. I got caught up in it, and before I knew it, I was in too deep. When I needed to get out, they made sure I stayed in. And when they found out I had access to your information, they used it. Sarah recoiled, the words cutting into her like a knife. You used me? You let them steal my identity, Peter? I trusted you. Peter's expression softened, and he reached out as if to take her hand, but she pulled back, her pulse quickening. I didn't know what they were going to do with it, Sarah. When they came to me, they said they just needed some information. They said it would be quick and clean. They wanted to launder money through the loan, to make it look legitimate, but they never intended for it to go this far. I swear I tried to pull back, but they threatened me, threatened people I care about. I couldn't get out. Sarah's mind was spinning, trying to process everything Peter had just said. The feeling of betrayal overwhelmed her, but there was something in Peter's voice that seemed genuine, a desperation she hadn't heard before. So you're telling me, Sarah said slowly, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief, that you were blackmailed into letting them steal my identity and take out a loan? And now they're going to destroy everything, aren't they? Peter nodded, his face a mixture of regret and fear. I didn't think they would go this far. But I made a mistake, Sarah. I thought I could fix it, but I got pulled back in. And now you're caught in the middle of it. She was silent for a long time, absorbing the weight of what Peter was saying. Everything about this situation felt wrong. The betrayal, the danger, the fact that her own past, her connection to Peter, was now the very thing that had drawn her into a tangled web of crime. Why should I believe you? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. You've lied to me before. You hurt me, and now this. Peter's eyes darkened, but his tone was earnest. Because I didn't want any of this to happen to you, Sarah. I'm not trying to drag you into this any further. I want to help. I can tell you who the people are. I can get you in touch with the right people who can take them down. But we have to move fast. They're onto us. They know I'm trying to back out. Sarah stared at him, feeling torn. The old part of her, who had once cared about Peter, wanted to believe him. But the practical part of her, the one who had been burned before, was skeptical. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. We'll do this your way. But if you're lying to me, if this is some game you're playing, I swear I'll make you regret it. Peter nodded, relief flooding his face. I swear to you, Sarah. I'm not playing games. But you need to trust me. If we're going to end this, we have to work together. Her heart raced, but Sarah made a decision in that moment. She had no other choice. The fraud, the texts, the money. Everything had led her here. And if she was going to get her life back, she had to face it head-on. Fine, she said, her voice steady but cold. Let's do it. But know this, Peter. I'm in this for me, not you. I just want my life back. The days that followed Sarah's meeting with Peter were some of the most nerve-wracking of her life. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on a tightrope, balancing between uncovering the truth and falling into a trap she couldn't escape. Peter's admission about being coerced into helping criminals had sent her mind racing, but a part of her still wasn't sure if she could fully trust him. It wasn't just the financial mess she was dealing with anymore. Her life, her safety, and even her future were on the line. Peter had promised her that he would help get her life back. But his involvement in a criminal organization was a dangerous liability. He'd warned her that these people didn't just play dirty, they played for keeps. One evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table, reviewing a stack of legal documents, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, half expecting a message from Peter or one of the lawyers who had been trying to help her with the fallout from the fraud. Instead, it was an unknown number. We know you're looking into things. Don't think you can run. We'll be watching. The message was short, but the threat was clear. Whoever was behind this, whether it was the criminal group Peter had warned her about or someone else entirely, was watching her. And they knew she was getting closer to something. Her pulse quickened, and she felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. She slammed the phone down onto the table, trying to steady her breathing. This wasn't just a scam anymore. It was real. And whoever was behind it wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Minutes later, her phone rang again. This time, it was Peter. Her fingers trembled as she answered the call. "Peter," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I just got a message. It's from the people behind the fraud. They're watching me. What the hell is going on?" Peter's voice came through, strained and low. "I was afraid of this. They know you're looking into them, Sarah. They don't like people digging around in their business. You have to be careful. Don't trust anyone who gets too close to you. They might be involved." "Who is they, Peter?" Sarah demanded, feeling the anger rise in her chest. "Who are we talking about here? Who's pulling the strings?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Peter spoke again, his voice was laced with tension. "I can't tell you everything right now. Not yet. But I'm working on it. We're going to take them down. We have to. But we have to be smart about it. This is bigger than just you and me. These people have connections, Sarah. And if you're not careful, they'll destroy everything." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she processed his words. Her eyes moved to the stack of papers in front of her, the weight of her situation suddenly hitting her all over again. She wasn't just a victim of identity theft anymore. She was tangled up in something far darker, and she didn't know if she could trust Peter to help her out of it. "I don't care what it takes, Peter," she said, her voice resolute. "I'm getting my life back. I'm not going to let these people ruin everything I've worked for. And I'm not backing down. Not now." Peter's voice softened, almost as if he were trying to reach through the phone and calm her. "I get it, Sarah. But you're going to have to trust me. I'm the only one who can help you get out of this. You can't do it alone." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone in her hand, the silence ringing in her ears. It was clear that the stakes had just been raised. The next day, Sarah decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to take control of the situation, even if that meant facing off against people who were far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She made a decision that would push her deeper into the mystery, but also bring her one step closer to finding the truth. She needed to meet Peter's people, the ones who had been pulling his strings, and find a way to get inside their operation. It wasn't the safest move, but Sarah was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. That evening, Peter texted her with a location. "Meet me at the old warehouse on State Street. 10 p.m. Bring only what you need. Don't bring anyone else." The warehouse was in an industrial part of town, far from the safety of her familiar surroundings. Sarah parked her car a few blocks away, scanning her surroundings as she approached the building. The streets were empty, and the dim streetlights did little to ease the sense of unease that had settled in her stomach. She took a deep breath before stepping inside. The air inside was thick with the smell of old metal and dust. The only light came from a single bulb hanging overhead, casting long shadows against the concrete walls. Peter was already waiting for her, sitting on a stack of crates, his face grim. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded. "I'm sure. We're doing this now, Peter." He stood and led her through a narrow corridor that smelled of mildew and oil. They reached a small, makeshift office at the back of the warehouse. It was a room filled with computers and scattered paperwork, the kind of place that looked like it belonged to someone who didn't want to be found. Peter motioned for her to sit at a desk, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting someone. "This is it. This is where they've been running their operation." "The people who set you up. Who are they?" Sarah pressed, needing answers. Peter looked at her, his expression torn. I'm still gathering information. But these guys are ruthless. They've got people everywhere, lawyers, hackers, people who can make things disappear. This isn't something you can just walk away from. Just as Sarah opened her mouth to ask another question, the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses, even though it was well past nightfall. The man's face was partially obscured, but there was no mistaking the danger that radiated off of him. "Peter," the man said, his voice cold and hard. "You've been talking." "I don't like it when people talk." Sarah froze. The game had just changed. She wasn't sure what kind of danger she was really in, but she knew one thing for certain. The stakes were higher than ever. The man who had entered the room was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded a quiet, dangerous confidence. His dark sunglasses, despite the late hour, only added to the aura of mystery that surrounded him. Sarah's heart rate picked up as the tension in the room thickened. Peter's expression hardened, and his eyes flickered briefly to Sarah before he stepped in front of her, subtly shielding her from the stranger's gaze. "Who's this?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly, despite her efforts to remain composed. The man didn't answer her directly. Instead, he took a few slow steps into the room, his boots clicking ominously on the concrete floor. Peter took a deep breath, clearly steeling himself. "Sarah, this is Leo." "He's not someone you want to cross." "Leo," Sarah repeated quietly, as if testing the name. It didn't sound familiar, but the way Peter reacted told her everything she needed to know. This was no ordinary guy. Leo was someone to be feared. Leo finally removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, piercing eyes that scrutinized Sarah with unsettling precision. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he just sized her up, his gaze like a weight pressing down on her chest. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine, but she refused to show fear. "Peter," Leo said after a long pause, his voice low and deliberate, "you've been talking. That's not how things are done around here. You know better." Peter shifted uncomfortably but didn't back down. "I didn't have a choice." "She's involved now, Leo. You know I couldn't just leave her out of it." Leo's expression remained unreadable as he turned his focus back to Sarah. "So, you're the one who's going to clean up the mess Peter made." He paused, watching her intently. "Tell me, Sarah, do you even know what you're getting into?" Her stomach tightened, but she refused to flinch under his gaze. "I don't know everything, but I know enough, and I want my life back. So, if you've got answers, Leo, you better start talking." Leo chuckled softly, a dark, almost menacing sound. "I like her. You've got guts, Sarah. But guts don't change the fact that you're in deep now. And there's no way out unless you play by the rules. Understand?" Sarah nodded, her throat dry, but her resolve solid. "I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't ask for this, but I'm not going to sit back and let you people ruin everything. Not anymore." Peter looked at her, clearly torn, but Leo was the one who spoke next, his tone no longer playful. "I'm not here to make deals. I'm here to give you an ultimatum, Sarah," Leo said, his voice sharp, each word cutting through the air like a knife. "You help us clean up Peter's mess, and I'll make sure this all goes away. You'll walk away with a clean slate. But if you don't..." He let the sentence trail off ominously. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "If I don't?" she asked, her voice steely. Leo didn't need to finish the thought. The cold look in his eyes said it all. There would be no mercy, no second chances. She would be just another casualty, another name erased. "I'll do it," Sarah said before she could overthink it, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll help you. But you need to promise me one thing: no more threats. No more games. I just want this over." Leo gave a slight nod, almost as if he were amused by her defiance. "You're asking for a lot, but I'll make you a deal, Sarah." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. "You want your life back? Fine. Help us settle Peter's debt, and I'll make sure no one comes after you again. but you have to do things my way. No questions. No second guessing. And if I don't? She asked, her voice tinged with defiance. Leo smiled coldly, his lips curling up just enough to make Sarah's skin crawl. Then you'll learn the hard way why we don't make threats. You'll be gone before you even know it. The air between them was thick with tension as Sarah weighed her options. She didn't have many left. If she walked away from this deal, she'd be putting herself, and possibly Peter, at even greater risk. Deal, she said finally, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. I'll do whatever it takes to clean up this mess. But I want to make one thing clear: once this is over, I'm done with all of you. I want my name cleared. I want my life back. Leo's eyes glinted with a sharp, calculating gleam. Done. But remember, this is a dangerous game you're playing, Sarah. You better be prepared for what's coming. With that, Leo stood and motioned for Peter to follow him. We'll be in touch. Get your things in order. We'll need you on the next job. Peter hesitated for a moment, looking back at Sarah with a conflicted expression, but then he nodded and followed Leo out of the room. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Sarah alone in the dim light of the warehouse. She sank back into the chair, her mind racing. What had she just gotten herself into? What kind of people had Peter really been involved with? This was no longer just about her identity being stolen. This was about a criminal organization, and somehow she was now part of it. As she sat there, trying to make sense of everything, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, and a wave of dread washed over her as she saw the name on the text. It's not over. Not by a long shot. The message was from an unknown number. Her pulse quickened as she read it over again. She wasn't just in the game. She was its next target. The weight of the decision hung over Sarah like a thick fog, suffocating every thought. She had just agreed to play in a game where the stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. As the night settled into an eerie silence, she couldn't shake the image of Leo's cold eyes, the way he had looked at her, as if she were just another pawn in their world of shadows. Her hands trembled as she gripped her phone, staring at the ominous message from the unknown number. It's not over. Not by a long shot. The words echoed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. Who was watching her now? Was it Leo's group or someone else? She had no way of knowing for sure, but one thing was clear: her life had taken a turn she couldn't undo. Every choice she made from here on out would pull her deeper into a world she wasn't prepared for. After a few moments of hesitation, she decided it was time to reach out to someone. She needed answers. She needed to find out what exactly she had walked into. Peter was the obvious choice. If anyone knew what she was up against, it was him. She quickly dialed his number, holding her breath as it rang. When Peter picked up, his voice was low, guarded. Sarah? What's going on? You're okay, right? I'm fine. I think, she said, her voice shaky despite her best efforts. Leo. What the hell was that about? What did I just agree to? Who are these people? There was a long silence on the other end before Peter spoke again, his tone tight with tension. I didn't want you to get involved in this, Sarah. I should have kept you out of it, but now. His words trailed off, as if he was unsure how to explain everything without making the situation worse. Now it's too late, she interrupted, the frustration bubbling over. I've already made my choice, but I need to know what I'm up against. I need to know exactly who these people are and why they're so dangerous. You owe me that much, Peter. Peter let out a heavy sigh. They're part of an underground network, Sarah. People who control things behind the scenes. Politics, businesses, money laundering, you name it. And these people don't just disappear. They pull the strings. Everything you've been going through, the mortgage, the fraud, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she processed the weight of his words. This wasn't just a simple scam anymore. This was a carefully orchestrated criminal operation, one that had entangled her life for reasons she still couldn't fully understand. So, what now? she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do we get out of this? How do we get me out of this? Peter hesitated before answering, and Sarah could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. I'll try to help you, Sarah. But the truth is, you've just stepped into their world. It's a dangerous world, and if they think you're trying to double-cross them or mess with their operation, they won't hesitate to come after you. They'll destroy everything. Her hands were shaking now, the gravity of the situation settling in. She had just signed herself up for a war she hadn't even known existed. The idea of walking away seemed impossible. I'm not backing down, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear that churned in her stomach. I've already lost everything. What's left for me to lose? Peter's voice softened, a hint of guilt seeping through. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never wanted this for you. But we're in this together now. I'll do whatever I can to help. Just be careful. They'll be watching. She hung up the phone, the silence of the warehouse pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of dread in her gut, knowing that today was the day her life would change forever. She dressed quickly, determined to take control of her fate, but as she stepped out the door, a sudden unease crept over her. Her car, parked across the street from her apartment, was gone. She rushed outside, her heart hammering in her chest. No, this couldn't be happening. She ran to the street, looking frantically in every direction. The parking spot where her car had been just hours before was empty. Damn it, she muttered under her breath, her mind racing. She pulled out her phone, dialing Peter's number again. It went straight to voicemail. Her pulse quickened as she realized what had just happened. They were making their move. Whoever these people were, they knew where she lived. They knew her routine. And now they were sending a message. She had no time to waste. She couldn't wait for Peter to call her back. She needed to take action now, before it was too late. With no car, no obvious way of getting around, Sarah decided to head to the one place she thought she could find answers: the warehouse. It wasn't much, but it was the only lead she had left. The journey to the warehouse felt like it took forever, each step heavier than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, following her every move. Every glance over her shoulder only confirmed her suspicions. When she finally arrived, she found the warehouse just as dark and foreboding as before. The streetlights outside cast long shadows, and the air was thick with the smell of oil and dust. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. No one was there. Not Peter. Not Leo. Hello, she called out, her voice trembling in the emptiness. Her eyes scanned the room, and that's when she saw it. A man standing by the door, his face partially obscured by the dim light. Sarah, he said, his voice smooth and cold, sending a chill down her spine. You've been looking for answers. Well, now you're going to get them. But be careful what you wish for. The truth can be dangerous. Her breath caught in her throat as the man stepped into the light. It was Leo. Leo's presence was like a shadow that loomed over her, his cold, calculating gaze never leaving Sarah as he stepped forward. She instinctively took a step back, her pulse quickening. The air around her felt heavier now, charged with tension. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, but all she could focus on was the chilling aura Leo exuded. So, this is where you've been hiding, huh? Sarah said, her voice shaky but trying to project strength. I thought you were busy making deals with Peter. What do you want with me? Leo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he surveyed her with a mix of amusement and something darker, more dangerous. His lips twitched into a barely noticeable smile, one that made Sarah's stomach churn. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said, his voice low and smooth, almost like honey dripping off his words. Most people wouldn't walk into this place knowing it could be the last thing they do. She swallowed hard, trying not to show the fear that was bubbling up inside of her. I'm not most people, Sarah replied, though her voice cracked slightly. Leo chuckled, and the sound was both charming and terrifying at the same time. He stepped closer, his boots tapping on the concrete floor with each deliberate stride. I like that. You remind me of someone I used to work with. A little reckless, a little desperate. He paused, eyeing her up and down. You're in deeper than you realize, Sarah. But maybe that's why I'm here. Sarah frowned, narrowing her eyes. What do you mean? Leo stopped a few feet away from her, then glanced toward the back of the warehouse as if assessing the space. You've already been marked. There's no turning back now. He looked at her, his gaze unreadable. The people who've been pulling the strings, they don't let people walk away from the mess they've created. They've already taken too much from you. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Who are these people? Leo's smile faded, replaced by a seriousness that almost felt like a warning. They're the ones who run the show. The ones who pull all the strings. The ones who've been behind your so-called mortgage. A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. But I don't understand. They didn't take the mortgage out on my name because they wanted to, right? There's a reason for this. A bigger reason. What's the endgame? Leo nodded, his expression darkening. You're not wrong. It wasn't just about ruining your life. You're part of something bigger now, whether you like it or not. They knew you'd figure it out eventually. That's why you're here, why they've kept you so close. You're a pawn in a much bigger game. Sarah's stomach twisted with fear, but a sense of determination also sparked inside her. So what? You're going to take me in? Tell me I'm stuck in your world, and that's it? No way out. Leo looked at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. It's not that simple. There's always a way out. But the price is high, Sarah. And I don't think you're ready for it. Her heart raced, and she stepped forward, refusing to back down. Tell me then. What's the way out? How do I get my life back? Leo's smile returned, but it was colder now. There's always a choice, but not always an easy one. If you want out of this life, you'll have to make a sacrifice. A real one. You can either walk away now, disappear, and live with the knowledge that you let them win, or you can stand with me, help me clean up Peter's mess, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get your life back. But it won't come cheap. Sarah took a step back, her mind swirling with everything he was saying. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about survival. She had to make a choice, but it felt like both options would come at a devastating cost. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, but her thoughts were clouded with doubt. She had lost so much already, her identity, her peace of mind, her security. And yet, if she left this world now, it would always haunt her. They would always be looking for her, hunting her down for the things they wanted, the things they'd stolen. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked, looking up at Leo, her voice desperate. Why are you even helping me? What do you want from me? Leo's gaze softened for just a fraction of a second, and for the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability. It's not about me wanting something from you, he said, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. I'm doing this because I've seen people like you before. People who get caught up in something they don't understand. They think they can run away, but they can't. Not from these people. I know how it ends. And I don't want you to end up like the others. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind still racing with questions, but for the first time, a sense of clarity washed over her. She couldn't do this alone. She didn't have the strength. But maybe, just maybe, Leo could help her find a way out. I don't want to be part of this world, Sarah said firmly. I just want my life back. But if I have to fight for it, then I will. Leo studied her for a long moment before nodding, as if something had shifted in his mind. All right, he said, his voice cold but strangely approving. You're not as naive as I thought. I'll help you, Sarah. But remember this, nothing comes without consequences. You won't just get your life back. You'll be different when this is over. And you'll have to live with the choices you make. Sarah nodded, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I can handle it. Leo stepped back, giving her space as he surveyed her with an unreadable expression. "We'll see." As he turned to walk away, Sarah felt the weight of his words sink in. There was no going back now. She was in it, and the fight for her life had only just begun. The warehouse door creaked shut behind Sarah with a resounding thud, echoing through the empty space as she stood frozen in place. Leo's words lingered in the air, heavy with the promise of danger and the looming shadows of the choices that lay ahead. Her heart raced, each beat thundering in her chest, as if in sync with the weight of the decision she'd just made. She had agreed to walk deeper into the labyrinth of deceit, to stand with someone she barely trusted, in a world she didn't understand. But she had no choice. The alternative, standing alone, seemed even worse. "Are you really ready for this?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible against the quiet of the warehouse. She didn't expect an answer, but the question still gnawed at her, pulling at the edges of her mind. With a sigh, Sarah walked toward the back of the warehouse, the walls closing in around her as if to remind her that there was no easy escape from this life now. As she approached a table, she noticed Leo standing by a dusty cabinet, his eyes scanning the contents of a thick folder. He glanced up as she walked toward him, his expression unreadable. "Sit," Leo commanded, his voice sharp but not unkind. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then she pulled out the nearby chair, dragging it across the floor with a loud scrape. The noise seemed to make the air in the room feel even more oppressive. She sat down, crossing her arms over her chest as she waited for him to speak. Leo didn't waste any time. "You've just entered a world that doesn't operate like you're used to. People like you, they want answers, they want the truth, but they're not always ready for what that truth brings. You're about to get a crash course in how things work in this world." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't want to be scared, but the reality of her situation was beginning to set in. She wasn't just dealing with a shady mortgage company anymore. She was tangled up in something much, much bigger. "Is Peter involved in all of this?" she asked, her voice low and cautious. Leo's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Peter's always been involved in some way or another. He's the kind of guy who pretends to stay on the outside, but trust me, he's always been part of the machine. You can't escape that." He paused, letting his words hang in the air before continuing. "If you want to survive this, Sarah, you need to learn how to navigate this world. I can teach you, but you have to promise me one thing." Sarah leaned forward, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. "What's that?" "Never let your guard down. Not with anyone. Not even with me." A chill ran down her spine. She knew he wasn't just talking about the people they were fighting against. He was talking about himself, too. Leo wasn't someone she could trust fully, and neither were the people who had pulled her into this mess. "Understood," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Leo seemed satisfied with her answer. "Good. Now, we need to get to work." He opened the thick folder in front of him and spread its contents on the table. Papers, maps, and photographs were scattered across the surface, forming a tangled web of information that made Sarah's head spin. She leaned in, trying to make sense of the chaos. "What is all this?" she asked, scanning the photographs. Some of them showed people she didn't recognize, but others featured Peter and even Leo, though his image was grainy, taken from a distance. "This," Leo said, "is the heart of the operation. These people, these companies, they're all connected. There's a network that controls everything, and we're going to take it down. But first, you need to understand who's involved." Leo pointed to a photograph of a man in his late 50s, his face hard, his eyes cold. "This is Marcus Whitaker," Leo said. "He's one of the key players. He's the one who's been orchestrating the mortgage schemes, the ones that tied you into all this." Sarah's stomach lurched as she stared at the man's face. "So he's the one who had your name put on that mortgage?" "Yes," Leo interrupted. "He's got connections everywhere, including people in high places. Marcus is one of the ones pulling the strings, and he's not someone you want to cross. Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. How do we stop him? Leo's gaze hardened. It's not about stopping him. It's about making him believe you're working with him. That's the only way to get close enough to take him down. Once you're in, you can gather the information we need to destroy his operation. Sarah felt a cold shiver run through her. She had no idea what she was walking into, but one thing was clear, there was no going back. All right, she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her insides. What's the plan? Leo's smile returned, but this time, it was different, more calculating. First, we need to make sure you're on their radar. You can't stay in the shadows forever. We're going to have to make a move, and it has to be bold. If they think you're too quiet, they'll get suspicious. She nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was suggesting. She would have to put herself in the lion's den to get close to the very people who had ruined her life. But she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she had lost. Are you ready? Leo asked, his voice laced with a mix of anticipation and warning. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind clear now. This was her only chance. I'm ready. Leo's eyes glinted with approval. Good. The game begins now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days felt like a blur of tense moments and high-stakes decisions. Sarah barely had time to breathe before Leo plunged her deeper into the world she had already begun to fear. Each step she took, she felt herself sinking further, the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. But there was no turning back now she was in this fight, whether she was ready or not. Leo's plan was clear. She needed to get close to Marcus Whitaker, the man behind the mortgage scam. But getting close to someone like Marcus wasn't simple. He was elusive, always surrounded by a tight circle of loyalists, people who would never hesitate to protect him. Sarah needed to become a part of that circle, a task that was easier said than done. Leo's first move was to get her an invitation to one of Marcus's high-profile parties. The kind of event where power players from all walks of life gather to network, make deals, and, as Leo put it, play their games. For Sarah, it would be her chance to get inside, to show that she could blend in with the people who ran this world. But first, Leo had to teach her how to act the part. The night before the party, Leo took Sarah to a boutique in the heart of the city. He didn't give her a choice about the outfit. In fact, he barely gave her a chance to speak as he guided her through racks of expensive dresses, pointing out the ones he thought would fit her perfectly. This one, Leo said as he held up a sleek black gown, the fabric shimmering under the harsh lighting. Marcus doesn't like subtlety. He likes power, confidence. This will send the right message. Sarah stared at the dress, unsure whether to be angry or resigned. It was beautiful, but it felt like a costume, one that she had no right to wear. But then again, what choice did she have? I don't know, Leo, she began, her voice trailing off as she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Leo shot her a hard look. You need to look like you belong. If you act like you don't, Marcus will smell fear a mile away. Confidence is your only weapon here. With a sigh, Sarah took the dress from him and entered the fitting room. She didn't need to be told how to wear confidence, she'd been faking it for weeks now. But something about tonight felt different. She wasn't just faking it anymore. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world that could swallow her whole if she wasn't careful. When she stepped out in the dress, Leo's eyes scanned her from head to toe, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah felt a wave of self-doubt crash over her, but then Leo nodded, the faintest glimmer of approval in his gaze. Good. Now let's get you prepared. Later that night, as Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in her hotel room, she barely recognized herself. The dress clung to her body in all the right places, accentuating the curves she'd never paid much attention to. The makeup Leo had insisted on was bold, smoky eyes paired with a dark red lip, and her hair was styled in soft waves, framing her face like a portrait of someone confident, powerful, and ready to conquer the world. "Is this really me?" she whispered to her reflection. The answer came swiftly: no, it wasn't. But she didn't have the luxury of being herself right now. She had to become someone else. Someone who could navigate this world without being destroyed by it. With a deep breath, Sarah grabbed her clutch, making her way to the car Leo had arranged for her. The journey to Marcus's party was silent, the streets passing by in a blur as her mind raced with what lay ahead. She thought of her past, of her simple life, of the girl she used to be, someone who didn't know what it was like to live under constant threat. Now, that girl felt like a distant memory. She was about to enter the lion's den. When the car finally pulled up to the venue, a lavish mansion on the outskirts of the city, Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew it would change her forever. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was nothing short of opulent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the room. The soft murmur of voices filled the air, and the clink of champagne glasses was almost rhythmic, like the beat of a drum signaling that everyone here was part of something bigger than themselves. As Sarah walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor, she felt every pair of eyes turn to her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her posture straight, her face an expression of calm confidence. She was here for a reason. Leo had made it clear: blend in, stay close, and don't make waves. She scanned the room, looking for any sign of Marcus. And then, there he was. He stood by a large window, surrounded by a few associates, his sharp features illuminated by the light from outside. His presence was commanding, people deferred to him, hanging on his every word. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. And for a split second, she felt like an intruder. But she quickly pushed that thought aside and moved toward the bar, where she could get a drink and observe. The evening passed in a blur of conversations, fake smiles, and superficial pleasantries. Marcus had yet to approach her, but Sarah wasn't surprised. He wouldn't. Not until she proved herself worthy of his attention. Finally, after what felt like hours, Leo appeared by her side, his presence like a shield. "You're doing well. Stay close to the group by the fireplace. Marcus will be there soon." Sarah nodded, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The next step of her plan was unfolding. She had to be patient. Marcus didn't trust easily, but when he did, he would be a valuable ally, or an even more dangerous enemy. It wasn't long before Marcus made his move. He approached Sarah with that same icy smile she'd seen in the photograph, his sharp eyes studying her with a calculated gaze. "Ms. Collins, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth and velvety. "It's rare to see someone so unique at an event like this." Sarah forced a smile, her pulse quickening as she extended her hand. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Whitaker. I've heard a lot about you." Marcus chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "I'm sure you have. But let's talk about you, shall we?" As he led her deeper into the conversation, Sarah realized that this was it. She had crossed the threshold into a world that would test her in ways she could never have anticipated. But she was ready, at least. She had to be. The night seemed to stretch on forever as Sarah stood beside Marcus Whitaker, listening intently to his words while trying to maintain an air of confidence. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. This was the beginning of something dangerous, a game of deception where even the slightest misstep could lead to her undoing. Marcus was charming, in a cold, calculating sort of way. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, felt carefully crafted, like he was playing some long, elaborate game. He was a master manipulator, and Sarah knew that the only way to survive this encounter was to mirror his every move, to match his calculated demeanor with one of her own. So, tell me, Ms. Collins, Marcus continued, his eyes narrowing as he studied her, what brings someone like you into this little world of ours? Sarah forced herself to smile, aware of the fact that every word she said could be scrutinized. She had to tread carefully. I've always been interested in real estate and investment, she said, keeping her voice steady. But recently, I've found myself needing to expand my horizons, to explore new opportunities. I'm looking for ways to make something more of myself, something beyond the ordinary. Marcus' lips curled slightly as if he were pleased by her answer, but his eyes held a sharpness that made Sarah's pulse quicken. I see, he said, his voice smooth like silk. And tell me, what kind of opportunities are you looking for? You've come to the right place, after all. There's no shortage of lucrative ventures if you know where to look. Sarah paused for a moment, considering her response. She couldn't afford to seem too eager, but she couldn't afford to seem disinterested either. The balance was delicate, and she was walking a tightrope. I'm interested in the bigger picture, she said, her voice low but confident. I want to understand how everything works, not just on the surface. How the players move, how the deals are made, the kind of power that drives everything. Marcus seemed to appraise her for a moment, as if weighing her words, before nodding slowly. I like your ambition, Ms. Collins. But be careful. The bigger the game, the more dangerous the players. You might find yourself in over your head if you're not careful. Sarah met his gaze, refusing to let any hint of fear show. She had been in over her head since the moment she'd stepped into this world. But there was no turning back now. I understand, she said, giving him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But I think I'm ready for it. I've been through enough to know when to trust and when to move cautiously. Marcus studied her for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on her face, as if trying to peel back the layers of her persona. It was unnerving, but Sarah refused to flinch. Well then, Marcus said, finally breaking the silence. It's good to know you're not naive. We'll see if you're truly ready. You've been invited to the right place tonight, but this is only the beginning. We'll see how you handle things when the stakes are higher. He gave a small nod, signaling the end of the conversation. Sarah felt a flicker of relief, but she knew this was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As Marcus turned to speak with someone else, Sarah's mind raced. What had just happened? She had been granted a taste of the world Marcus inhabited, but she hadn't yet earned a place in it. She needed more information, more leverage, more understanding of the power dynamics at play. As she moved away from the conversation, she felt the weight of Leo's instructions settle over her like a cloak. She was supposed to get close to Marcus, learn from him, but she had to be careful. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart. The evening wore on, the luxurious mansion filled with laughter and chatter, but Sarah was lost in her thoughts. She had to figure out how to gain Marcus' trust, how to position herself as an ally rather than a threat. She knew that she couldn't rush things. She had to play this game patiently. As the night progressed, Sarah found herself drifting toward the balcony, where the cool night air calmed her frazzled nerves. The city lights below twinkled like 1,000 stars, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. This wasn't her world, not yet. But she could make it her world, if she played her cards right. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. You look lost in thought. Sarah turned to find Leo standing behind her, his expression inscrutable. I'm just thinking, she said, her voice steady. About what comes next. Leo took a step closer, his gaze flicking to the crowd inside the mansion. You've made a good impression, but don't get too comfortable. Marcus is watching. He won't trust you easily. You'll have to earn that trust, but don't be fooled. He's a dangerous man. He'll test you, and if you fail, he won't hesitate to throw you away. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had seen the power Marcus wielded tonight, and it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. But she also knew that she couldn't afford to be intimidated. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. Whatever it takes. Leo's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he nodded. Good. But remember, Sarah, this is just the beginning. There's a lot more at stake now. You need to stay focused, stay sharp. As he turned to leave, Sarah watched him go, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The game was far from over and the stakes were higher than ever. But she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she was so close. The following days were filled with careful observation and subtle maneuvering. Sarah continued to attend the high-profile gatherings Leo arranged, each one bringing her closer to Marcus. But she knew that she was playing a dangerous game. Every move she made was scrutinized. One wrong step, and everything could come crashing down. But Sarah had made up her mind she was in this for the long haul. She was going to take down the people who had ruined her life, no matter what it cost her. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, because the moment she stopped, that's when the game would be over. The days blurred into one another, and Sarah found herself adapting more and more to the rhythm of the world she was now a part of. Leo's guidance was constant, a steady presence at her back, but the weight of the situation was starting to take its toll. She was walking a razor-thin line, balancing on the edge of a precipice. One misstep, and she would fall. She had spent the last few weeks maneuvering through circles of powerful people, each encounter with Marcus Whitaker sharpening her instincts. The more she saw of him, the more she realized how dangerous he truly was. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a predator, calculating and ruthless. But for now, she had to bide her time. She couldn't afford to rush things. She had to make him trust her. Leo had been clear. Every interaction was a step toward the goal. But that didn't make the waiting any easier. It was another extravagant party, another opportunity to get closer to Marcus. Sarah had dressed carefully, more carefully than ever before, aware of the game she was playing. The glittering ballroom was alive with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of expensive glasses. Everywhere she turned, there were faces she didn't recognize, each person more confident and self-assured than the last. She moved through the crowd like she belonged, making small talk and offering her best smile. But her mind was laser-focused on one thing: Marcus. She hadn't spoken to him in a few days, and she knew that now was the time to make her next move. Leo had told her to wait for the right moment, but she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. Her life had been upended in a matter of weeks. Every day that passed without significant progress was another day she felt herself slipping deeper into a world she didn't fully understand. And it was clear that Marcus was testing her, probing her for weaknesses. But so far, she had managed to keep up the facade. As she walked past a group of men discussing business, her eyes scanned the room, landing on Marcus. He was standing in a corner, talking to a tall man Sarah didn't recognize. His attention was focused, his face set in a mask of concentration. This was the perfect time. Taking a deep breath, she made her way toward him, the rhythm of the conversation around her falling away as she zeroed in on her target. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she pushed the anxiety down. This was it. This was the moment. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice steady as she reached his side. Marcus turned, his expression unreadable for a moment before his lips curled into a small smile. He had that way of making you feel like the center of his attention, like he was truly listening, even when his mind was calculating 10 moves ahead. "Miss Collins," he greeted her with a polite nod. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. I trust everything is well." "It is," Sarah replied smoothly. "I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for the invitation. It's not often that someone like me gets to be a part of such an exclusive gathering." She smiled demurely, letting the words hang in the air. She knew the power of flattery, especially in this world. Marcus studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning her face as if trying to read her thoughts. "You've learned quickly," he remarked. "Most people don't know how to navigate events like this without making fools of themselves." "I suppose I've had some good mentors," she replied, keeping her tone light but confident. It was the right answer. Leo had taught her how to blend in, how to act like she belonged, and now it was paying off. There was a long silence before Marcus spoke again. "So, what is it you really want, Ms. Collins? I don't believe you're here just to mingle." The question hit her like a punch to the stomach, but she didn't flinch. She had been preparing for this. Her goal had been clear from the start: gain Marcus' trust, learn from him, and, when the time was right, strike. But how to say that? How to reveal her true intentions without tipping her hand? "I'm interested in something more than just making money," she said slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "I want to understand how power works. How people like you, people who have everything, navigate the world. I've been given a glimpse of it, and now I want more." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "More?" he repeated. "You want to know how to be like me?" Sarah held his gaze. "I want to know how to create my own empire, how to build something that lasts. I've seen how fragile everything can be, how quickly everything can fall apart. But I also see how people like you have figured out how to make things work in their favor." Marcus chuckled, a dark, knowing sound. "It's not as easy as you think, Ms. Collins. Power isn't given, it's taken. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know and what you're willing to sacrifice." Sarah's stomach tightened at the implication, but she didn't let it show. "I'm willing to sacrifice whatever it takes," she said, her voice low and firm. "I'm not afraid." For a moment, Marcus studied her, his gaze piercing as though trying to find the cracks in her facade. But after a beat, he smiled again. This time, it was less friendly and more calculating. "We'll see, won't we?" he said, his tone almost too casual, as if he were testing her. "In this world, there are no guarantees. You either adapt, or you fall. And I must say, you're certainly adapting. But remember, this game can be deadly." "I'm not afraid of playing a dangerous game," Sarah replied, her voice steady, even as her heart raced. Marcus gave a slow, appraising nod. "I like that. We'll see how far you can go." He turned to the man he had been speaking with earlier, dismissing her without another word. Sarah stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just transpired. She had made a connection. She had shown him that she wasn't just some naive outsider. She was someone who could play the game, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with him and survive. The night went on, but Sarah's mind was focused on the conversation she had just had. Marcus had given her a taste of what was to come, a warning, perhaps, or maybe an invitation. Either way, she had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. The next few days were filled with tension. Marcus had been distant, yet she knew that the seeds of trust were being planted. Leo, too, seemed pleased with her progress. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched more closely than ever before. Leo had warned her that once Marcus took an interest, it was a double-edged sword. He would try to learn more about her, push her boundaries. The more she allowed herself to be vulnerable, the more Marcus would test her. But Sarah couldn't afford to pull back now. She had already come too far. As the days passed, she felt herself getting closer to something. What, exactly, she wasn't sure. But she knew it wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be pretty. The stakes were rising, and she had to stay one step ahead. Her next move was clear. She needed to push harder. But how? How far was she willing to go? The line between ally and enemy was thin, and Sarah was beginning to realize that sometimes you had to blur it if you wanted to win. It had been a week since Sarah's conversation with Marcus, and the weight of the days had begun to press on her shoulders. As much as she had made strides in gaining his attention, she could feel the tension mounting. The games were becoming more intricate, more dangerous, and Sarah was beginning to understand just how much was at stake. The party had been a turning point, a test she had passed with cautious confidence. But Marcus was a predator, and predators never stopped hunting. She knew now that he would be watching her, evaluating her every move. The thrill of the chase had only just begun. It was late in the evening when Sarah received the text. It was from Leo. Marcus wants to meet. Tomorrow. Alone. Be ready. She read the message several times, each word sinking in deeper. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was a test. She knew Marcus didn't make requests like this unless he was serious. And she had no illusions about what serious meant in this world. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring out of the window at the city below. She had anticipated something like this. After all, Marcus had shown an interest in her beyond the usual business transactions. He was probing, testing her limits, seeing how far she could be pushed before she broke. And now he wanted to meet her alone. What does he want from me? That question lingered in the back of her mind as she prepared herself. She couldn't afford to let fear take over. She had come this far, and she couldn't back out now. The next day, Sarah found herself standing outside an exclusive, private estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion was imposing, surrounded by high gates and sprawling grounds. Everything about it screamed power, wealth, control, and a carefully cultivated image. As she walked toward the front door, a feeling of unease gnawed at her. This was no longer just a business transaction. It was something personal now. Marcus had invited her into his world, and Sarah knew there was no turning back once she stepped inside. The door opened before she could knock, and a tall, sharply dressed man greeted her. He didn't say a word, but motioned for her to follow him. As she stepped inside, she felt the air change, thick with unspoken tension and a quiet, suffocating intensity. The hallways were dimly lit, the floors polished to a sheen. Everything about the place screamed control. They stopped at a large oak door. The man knocked once before opening it, revealing Marcus sitting behind an expansive desk, a glass of dark liquor in his hand. "Miss Collins," Marcus said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of something dangerous. "Please, come in. Have a seat." Sarah walked into the room, her steps steady despite the unsettling feeling creeping over her. She took a seat in front of his desk, her back straight, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that a show of weakness in this world could be exploited, so she would not give him that satisfaction. "You've been making quite an impression, Miss Collins," Marcus continued, his eyes studying her closely. "Not many people can gain my attention so quickly. I'm intrigued by you." Sarah fought the urge to squirm under his gaze, keeping her expression composed. "I try to be memorable," she said, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. "But I don't like to leave things to chance." Marcus chuckled, but it was a low, dark sound. "Indeed. I admire that. But then, that's why I've invited you here. I have a proposition for you." The word proposition struck her like a bell. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Marcus would make his move. But she didn't know what kind of proposition he was talking about. Was it another business deal? A personal request? Or something else entirely? She forced herself to remain calm. "What kind of proposition?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. His eyes never left her face. "You see, Miss Collins," he began slowly, "I'm always looking for someone with a particular set of skills. People who can see things others cannot, people who understand the true nature of power. And I think you might be just the person I'm looking for." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She could feel where this was headed, but she had to hear it from him. She had to know what he wanted. "And what exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the warm, friendly smile she had seen at the party. It was cold, calculating, and almost predatory. "I need someone to assist me with a delicate matter. Someone who can get close to the right people, gather information, and, if necessary, handle things in a way that others would prefer not to." Sarah's mind raced. What did this mean? What kind of delicate matter was he referring to? She had no doubt that whatever it wasn't legal, nor was it something she would have ever considered doing. But she couldn't afford to show hesitation. I see, she said, her voice neutral. And what makes you think I'm the right person for this? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Because, Ms. Collins, I know you've already been testing the waters. You've been getting closer to me, haven't you? Your interest in power, it's not a simple curiosity. It's a hunger. I can see it in your eyes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't react. Instead, she nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. You're right, she said, her voice steady. I've been learning. I want more than what I have now. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to do anything for it. Marcus didn't flinch. That's what I like about you, Ms. Collins. You're not naive. You're ambitious. And you understand the cost of ambition. She knew then that she was standing at a crossroads. Marcus was offering her something dangerous, something that could change everything. The temptation was strong. This was the power she had been chasing, the power that could finally get her revenge, get her justice. But at what cost? What exactly are you asking me to do? She pressed, trying to keep her voice calm and steady despite the swirling emotions inside her. Marcus paused, his gaze intense. Help me take down a rival. Someone who has been interfering with my operations. Someone who needs to be removed from the picture. It won't be easy, and it won't be clean. But I need someone I can trust to handle it. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. She had known it would come to this. But the question remained, could she afford to take the plunge? Could she afford not to? Marcus leaned back in his chair, waiting for her answer. The room felt suffocating as Sarah weighed her options. This was the crossroads. The beginning of something that would either make her or break her. I'll do it, she said, her voice low and unwavering. Marcus smiled, a glint of something dark flashing in his eyes. I knew you would. As Sarah left Marcus's estate, the weight of the decision settled in like a heavy burden. She had just entered a new phase of the game, and there would be no turning back. Whatever happened next, there was no way to go but forward. She had crossed the line, and now she was truly in the game. The weight of Sarah's decision felt heavier with every passing hour. As the evening stretched into night, the adrenaline from her meeting with Marcus slowly began to wear off, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. She had agreed to take on a dangerous task, one that could either elevate her to the heights of power or destroy everything she had worked for. Her mind kept replaying Marcus's words over and over again. Help me take down a rival. Someone who has been interfering with my operations. Someone who needs to be removed from the picture. She knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't asking for a business favor. He was asking her to step into the shadows, to do things that no one else could. Or would do. It was a job that would require her to betray her morals, but the question kept coming back to her. Could she afford not to? The next morning, Sarah found herself pacing the floors of her apartment, the walls closing in as the weight of her decision seemed to intensify. She couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's cold smile, the way he had made her feel like an equal, a trusted ally, when in reality, she was just another pawn in his game. But even as the doubt crept in, another part of her, the part she had kept buried for so long, felt something she hadn't expected: excitement. She was finally in a position of power. She had a chance to make something of herself, to carve out her place in a world that had always been out of reach. She pulled out her phone and dialed Leo's number. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice calm as always. "Sarah," he said, "how'd the meeting go?" She hesitated, trying to find the right words. I accepted his proposition. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Leo spoke, his tone serious, but not judgmental. I figured you would. It's the only move that makes sense. But be careful, Sarah. Marcus isn't someone you can trust. He'll use you until you're no longer useful. I know, she replied, her voice tight. but this is the only way forward. If I do this, if I play the game his way, I can finally take control of my life. I can finally have what I've always wanted. Leo sighed. I get it. I really do. But don't lose yourself in it. This isn't just a business deal. This is a war. And when you're fighting in a war, there are casualties. I'll be careful, Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure she meant it. She didn't know if she could be careful. Everything was spiraling so quickly, and she was losing track of where the line between what she wanted and what she had to do began and ended. You'll be okay, Leo said after a pause, his voice softer. Just remember why you're doing this. She didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts were already moving to the next phase, the next step in the plan Marcus had set in motion. I'll keep you updated, she said, ending the conversation quickly. The silence that followed felt thick and suffocating. She needed to act fast. Marcus would expect her to move quickly, and she couldn't afford to waste time. But what exactly was her first step? The answer came later that day. Sarah was in her office, sifting through emails, when she received a text from Marcus. I'll be in touch soon. For now, start with gathering information on Thomas Caldwell. He's the man standing in my way. Find out everything you can about him, his business dealings, his associates, his personal life. I want you to know him better than he knows himself. Sarah read the message twice, absorbing the cold finality of it. Thomas Caldwell. She didn't know much about him yet, but she would. She would make sure of it. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, her mind already racing with possibilities. There were many ways to gather information. She could use her network, her contacts, or she could go deeper into the shadowy corners of the business world that she had barely begun to understand. But there was one thing she knew for certain. To truly take control of the situation, she would need to get close to Caldwell. She would need to understand not just his business, but his weaknesses. And to do that, she would need to dig deeper than anyone else could or would. The next few hours were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and online research. Sarah started with the basics: Caldwell's public profile, his financial history, his corporate ventures. But as she dug deeper, she started to uncover things that didn't add up. There were whispers in the business world about shady dealings, about rumors of illegal activities that no one seemed willing to confirm or deny. And then there were the personal connections. Caldwell was a man of many circles, each more dangerous than the last. He had ties to influential figures in both the legitimate business world and the criminal underworld. It was clear that he wasn't just a rival to Marcus in terms of business. He was an opponent in a much more dangerous game. Sarah's research led her to a meeting scheduled for the following week, an exclusive dinner gathering with high-profile investors. She knew that this could be her chance to make a direct connection with Caldwell. If she could infiltrate that event, if she could get close to him without raising suspicion, she might be able to learn everything she needed to know. She spent the rest of the evening preparing, strategizing. She would need the right look, the right approach. She couldn't afford to be out of place, to be seen as anything less than exactly what she was pretending to be. Someone who belonged. The next morning, she received another text from Marcus. The dinner. I want you to attend. Make an impression. But don't push too hard yet. We need to play this carefully. Let him trust you first. It was a simple command, but it set her nerves on edge. She had already agreed to be part of this game, but now the stakes were higher than ever. She wasn't just going to a dinner. She was stepping into the lion's den. That night, Sarah stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the strap of her dress. It was elegant but understated, exactly the type of attire that would fit into the high-end atmosphere of the dinner. She had spent hours preparing, making sure every detail was flawless. She couldn't afford to slip up now. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, composed, ready. But inside, she felt the butterflies fluttering. She wasn't just going to this dinner as a guest. She was going as a player, a calculated participant in a game where the prize was power and the consequences of failure were deadly. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. The night awaited her, and she had no idea what it would bring. But one thing was certain: the game had begun, and there was no turning back now. The evening air was crisp as Sarah made her way toward the luxury venue, a grand estate tucked away in one of the most exclusive parts of the city. The address was known only to a select few, and even fewer were ever invited to events like this. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a spectacle. A gathering of power, influence, and wealth, where every word spoken, every gesture made, could have long-reaching consequences. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her nerves in check. She had prepared for this moment for days, and she was determined not to let it slip through her fingers. The dress she wore, sleek, black, and understated, fit her perfectly, accentuating her confidence without drawing too much attention. She had always understood the art of blending in, of knowing when to stand out and when to stay in the shadows. Tonight, she would do both. As she approached the entrance, a valet in a black suit greeted her with a nod. He took her car keys and offered her an umbrella, but she waved it off. There was no need. Her heels clicked against the cobblestone as she walked up the grand staircase to the front door. The mansion loomed above her, its towering columns and intricate carvings giving it an almost mythical quality. The atmosphere inside was opulent, with chandeliers casting soft, golden light over the marble floors. The guests were dressed in evening gowns and tuxedos, their conversations low and refined, but the tension in the air was palpable. Sarah knew these were people who held the city in their hands, who moved unseen and whose decisions could topple empires with a single word. As she walked further into the ballroom, her eyes scanned the room, noting the faces she recognized: politicians, business tycoons, media moguls, all interspersed with the occasional shadowy figure who seemed to belong to neither world but somehow navigated them both with ease. And then there was Caldwell, standing off to the side with a small circle of his closest allies. His presence was magnetic, even from across the room. Thomas Caldwell was tall, with sharp features and a commanding air about him. He exuded power in the same way a predator exudes confidence. His gaze never lingered on any one person for too long, but it was as if he was constantly surveying the room, calculating. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that Marcus had been right. Caldwell was dangerous. His reputation preceded him, but now, as she stood in the same room with him, she could feel it for herself. She wasn't here to make her move just yet. Tonight, she needed to observe. She needed to blend in, find her place, and wait for the right moment to strike. As she approached the bar, she exchanged pleasantries with a few guests, keeping her interactions light and pleasant. She didn't want to give too much away. No one should know who she was or what she was doing here. But as the night wore on, she couldn't help but feel that she was being watched. Every time she turned, her gaze would meet someone else's, and the briefest of smiles would pass between them. Were they just friendly? Or were they sizing her up? Then, just as she was beginning to wonder if she'd ever truly blend in, Caldwell appeared at her side. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice smooth and low. "It's good to see you again." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced a smile. "Mr. Caldwell, it's a pleasure." She raised her glass slightly, toasting him before taking a sip of the champagne in her hand. "I must say, this event is truly impressive. I didn't expect anything less from you." Caldwell chuckled, a sound rich with self-assurance. "You flatter me. But yes, I like to make sure everything is perfect. After all, when you're at the top, there's no room for anything less than perfection." His eyes were intense, studying her. Sarah kept her composure, not allowing a hint of unease to show on her face. She had to be careful. Caldwell didn't miss details. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. "I've heard a lot about you," he continued, leaning in slightly. "You're making quite a name for yourself in the business world." Sarah didn't flinch. "I try to keep a low profile. I find it's better that way. It allows for more opportunities. Caldwell's lips curled into a knowing smile. Opportunities, indeed. He glanced around the room, as if scanning for potential threats or allies, before turning back to her. Tell me, Ms. Collins, what brings you to an event like this? You don't strike me as someone who attends these kinds of social gatherings. She tilted her head slightly, letting the hint of a smile play on her lips. Perhaps I'm looking for something more. Something that can't be found in the usual circles. I've always been drawn to where the real power is. The look in his eyes shifted for just a moment. Something flickered there. Was it approval? Or was it a challenge? She couldn't tell, but she felt a shift in the air between them. I see, he said, his voice dropping even lower. Well, I believe we could be of great use to one another. Power, Miss Collins, is never about making the right connections. It's about making the right moves before anyone else even knows what's happening. Sarah couldn't help but feel a thrill at his words. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had his attention, and now the dance could begin. I agree, she said, keeping her tone even. I've always believed that the key to success is knowing when to strike. And when to wait. Caldwell's smile widened, but there was a cold edge to it now. You're quite the interesting woman, Ms. Collins. I look forward to seeing just how far you can go in this game. Before Sarah could respond, he turned and walked away, seamlessly blending back into the crowd, leaving her standing alone with her thoughts. Her mind raced as she watched him disappear into the sea of high society figures. That was it? The interaction was brief, but the impact was immediate. Sarah felt like she had just been tested, and she had passed. Caldwell wasn't the type to waste time with pleasantries. If he had engaged with her, even for a moment, it meant she had made an impression. But now, the true challenge began. She had to keep playing this game. She couldn't let her guard down, not for a second. Every move she made had to be calculated. Every word she spoke had to be deliberate. She wasn't just a guest at this dinner. She was part of something much bigger, something that could change everything. The night wore on, and Sarah stayed close to the fringes of the crowd, watching and listening. She gathered small snippets of conversation, keen to pick up any details that could be useful later. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to gather information. She needed to understand how Caldwell operated, who his allies were, and what kind of leverage he had. As the dinner drew to a close, Sarah felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had made it through the evening without raising any suspicion. She had planted the seeds for future conversations, future opportunities. But there was still so much to do. Caldwell was just the beginning. As she walked out into the cool night air, she knew that this was only the first step. She was in the game now, and the real work was just beginning. The following days after the dinner were a blur of strategic planning and tense anticipation. Sarah spent hours poring over the information she had gathered, trying to piece together Caldwell's movements and connections. He had been elusive during their conversation, but she had managed to catch a glimpse of something deeper, something that hinted at his vulnerability. It was subtle, but she could see it now. Caldwell wasn't as untouchable as he liked to project. Sarah had learned the value of patience early in her career, and now it was more important than ever. She couldn't afford to rush things. Caldwell was a powerful man, and if she were going to take him down, or at least take her place by his side, she would need to move carefully, with precision. But just as she was getting comfortable in her new role, a message arrived that threw everything into chaos. It was late in the evening, and Sarah was reviewing some documents in her apartment when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. The message was from an unknown number, and the contents were brief but chilling. Meet me tomorrow night, 10 p.m. The old warehouse on Harrison Street. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. The message wasn't signed, but she knew instantly who it was from. Caldwell. Her mind raced as she processed the text. Why now? Why this sudden urgency? She had already decided to play this game carefully, to take her time and wait for the right moment. But now, Caldwell was pushing her into action sooner than she had anticipated. She stared at the phone for a moment longer, considering her options. This wasn't just a casual request. It was a command. But it was also an opportunity, one she couldn't afford to pass up. If I go, she thought, I might learn more than I ever could by simply observing him from the sidelines. But if I don't, the consequences of missing this meeting could be just as severe. Caldwell was a man who valued loyalty and initiative, and if he felt slighted or ignored, it could end her career before it even began. With a deep breath, Sarah made up her mind. She would go. The next evening, Sarah arrived at the old warehouse, its towering silhouette casting long shadows under the moonlight. The area was quiet, almost desolate, with only the distant hum of traffic breaking the eerie silence. It didn't look like a place where business deals were made, but then again, nothing about Caldwell's world was ever what it seemed. She parked her car in the dimly lit lot, her hands steady despite the nervousness that gnawed at her. She was dressed casually, as instructed, but she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't a dinner or a social event. This was a meeting in the shadows, in the kind of place where people didn't walk out unscathed if they made the wrong move. Taking one last look around, Sarah exited the car and walked toward the warehouse's large, rusted doors. As she approached, they creaked open, revealing the stark interior. The cold, metallic smell of the building hit her first, followed by the soft echo of her footsteps as she walked further inside. At the far end of the room, Caldwell stood in the shadows, his figure almost blending into the darkness. She could just make out the outline of his tall frame, his posture straight and unyielding. His eyes, however, were the only part of him that was visible, gleaming in the low light like those of a predator. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice low and inviting. "You came." Sarah nodded, careful to keep her expression neutral. "I'm here. What is it you want?" Caldwell stepped forward, his movements deliberate and measured. As he came closer, Sarah could see the hard edge to his features, the subtle tension in his jaw. Something about this meeting felt different, darker. "You've proven yourself," he said, his voice calm. "I've been watching you for a while now, Sarah. I've seen what you're capable of, and I think you're ready for the next step." Sarah held his gaze, unsure whether she should be flattered or suspicious. "The next step," she repeated, her voice steady despite the rising unease inside her. Caldwell smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was calculating, as though he were gauging her reaction. "You've been playing the game well," he continued. "But there are those who don't know their place in this world. They try to outmaneuver people like me, people who understand the game better than anyone. I need someone who can help me deal with them." Sarah's mind clicked into gear, immediately recognizing the implication. He wasn't just talking about business moves. He was talking about eliminating threats, about playing a much more dangerous game than she had signed up for. "Who are we talking about?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was starting to understand, but she needed confirmation. Caldwell stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the dim light. "I need you to help me deal with Marcus." He said the name with a chilling finality, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Marcus is a problem. He's been interfering with my business, trying to take my territory, and I won't allow it. You can help me end this." The room seemed to close in on Sarah as she processed Caldwell's words. Marcus? The man who had been so instrumental in her rise, the one who had pulled her into this game in the first place. And now Caldwell wanted her to turn against him? Her mind raced, but she kept her voice even. "And what happens if I refuse?" Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile never fading. "Refuse? That wouldn't be wise, Ms. Collins. You've already committed to this game. The only question now is how you want to play it. Do you want to be at the top, or do you want to fall to the bottom, where people like Marcus belong?" There was a brief silence, the weight of Caldwell's words hanging in the air. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when everything would change. She nodded slowly, her voice unwavering. "I'll help you." Caldwell's smile grew, as though he had been waiting for her to say those very words. "Good. I knew I could count on you." As she left the warehouse, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had just agreed to betray Marcus, the very person who had helped her get to this point. The person who had been there when she needed him most. But there was no turning back now. Sarah was in this world for better or for worse, and she was willing to do whatever it took to climb higher. The stakes were higher than ever, and the game had become more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. But as the cold wind brushed against her skin, Sarah realized one thing. She had just stepped into a war, and there would be no way out until it was over. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Sarah tried to stay focused, but the weight of her decision lingered in the back of her mind, growing heavier with each passing moment. She had made a pact with Caldwell, one that involved turning against Marcus, and though she had told herself it was just a strategic move, deep down, she knew she was playing with fire. She had grown to trust Marcus in the short time they had worked together. He had been a mentor to her, guiding her through the ruthless world of high finance with wisdom and caution. But Caldwell wasn't someone you could afford to turn down, not if you wanted to survive in this world. And now Marcus was a liability. He had become a threat to Caldwell's empire, and in this game, threats had to be eliminated. As the days wore on, Sarah found herself growing more and more anxious. Every interaction with Marcus felt strained, and every word she spoke to him seemed to ring hollow. It was as though she were playing a role, pretending to be his ally when, in truth, she was planning to destroy him. The worst part? She couldn't bring herself to tell him. The idea of facing him, of telling him the truth, was unbearable. She knew what it would do to him. She had seen the good in Marcus, seen the sincerity in his actions, and yet she was about to betray that trust in the name of ambition. But there was no other choice. She couldn't back out now. The night of the confrontation came sooner than Sarah had expected. Caldwell had given her a time and a place, an isolated park at the edge of the city, where Marcus often went for late-night walks to clear his mind. It was the perfect place for a private conversation, and it would give her the opportunity to confront him without anyone else watching. As Sarah drove to the park, her heart was in her throat. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to steady her nerves. The city lights flashed past her in a blur, but her mind was focused solely on what she was about to do. She had no idea how Marcus would react, but she knew he wouldn't take the betrayal well. No one would. By the time she arrived at the park, the air had turned crisp, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer in the fading light. The trees, bare and skeletal in the winter chill, lined the walking path that snaked through the park. Sarah's eyes scanned the area, her pulse quickening when she spotted him, a solitary figure standing near the park bench at the far end, just as she knew he would be. Marcus looked up when she approached, his face lighting up with a warm, welcoming smile. He had no idea what was coming, and for a moment, Sarah almost couldn't go through with it. But then she remembered Caldwell's cold, calculating words. "This is the only way to survive." "Sarah," Marcus greeted her, his voice full of genuine warmth. "I didn't expect to see you out here. Everything okay?" She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just needed to talk. Can we sit for a minute?" Marcus nodded and moved aside, allowing her to sit beside him on the bench. The air between them was comfortable, familiar. They had spent hours talking in this very park before, discussing business, life, and everything in between. But tonight, everything felt different. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest like a stone, and she struggled to keep her composure. "What's on your mind?" he asked, turning to face her. "You've been a little distant lately. Everything all right?" Sarah glanced at him, her heart heavy in her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but now that the moment was here, it was almost impossible to get the words out. I don't know how to say this, she began, her voice faltering. But I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening lately. About everything. Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? Sarah, you're scaring me. She shook her head, biting her lip as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. I'm sorry, Marcus. She inhaled sharply, her eyes welling up with tears that she quickly blinked away. I'm working with Caldwell. I'm with him now. Marcus' face went blank, as though the words hadn't quite registered. It wasn't until he looked deeper into her eyes that the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. His expression hardened, and Sarah could see the shock and disbelief slowly morph into something darker, something that made her stomach twist in knots. You're working with Caldwell? Marcus repeated, his voice low. After everything? After everything we've been through. Sarah opened her mouth to explain, but she couldn't find the words. How could she explain this to him? How could she justify this betrayal? I didn't have a choice, she whispered. He's too powerful, Marcus. I'm in too deep to walk away now. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning to face her again. His eyes were cold, but there was pain there too, raw, undeniable pain. You're telling me you've chosen him over me? After everything I've done for you. His voice was shaking now, but it wasn't with fear, it was with anger. The kind of anger that came from feeling utterly betrayed by someone you trusted. I didn't want to, Sarah said, her voice breaking. But this is how it has to be. If I want to survive in this world, I have to align with the right people. I can't afford to be on the outside anymore. Marcus laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You've lost yourself, Sarah. You're not the person I thought you were. I haven't lost myself, she argued, standing up to face him. I'm doing what I have to do to stay in the game. To stay alive. Alive? Marcus shot back, his eyes flashing. You think you'll be alive after this? You think Caldwell will protect you? You'll just be another pawn in his game, and when he's done with you, he'll throw you away like everyone else. His words stung, but Sarah refused to let them break her. I don't have the luxury of playing by the rules anymore, Marcus. I have to be ruthless if I want to make it. There was a long silence between them. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of their betrayal and the consequences of their choices. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but filled with a quiet resolve. You're making a mistake, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Sarah stood there, motionless, as the cold wind swept through the park, carrying with it the realization of what she had just lost. She had betrayed Marcus, and in doing so, she had sealed her fate. But as she turned to leave, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a terrifying thought. Was she making a mistake? The days after that night were a blur of guilt and apprehension. Sarah couldn't shake the image of Marcus walking away from her in the park, his shoulders hunched with betrayal. She had expected anger, maybe even disbelief, but she hadn't expected the deep sadness in his eyes. It was something she hadn't been prepared for, and it gnawed at her. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, and it followed her wherever she went. At work, at home, even in the quiet moments when she tried to focus on something else, Marcus's words echoed in her mind. You're making a mistake. It wasn't just the words themselves that troubled her, it was the weight behind them. The conviction in his voice had struck a chord deep inside her, and for the first time in days, she questioned everything she had done. Was it really worth it? Was she really ready to sacrifice everything for this new world she had entered? But then, there was Caldwell. And there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and she couldn't afford to second-guess herself. Not yet. Not while she was still trying to navigate this high-stakes game. Sarah's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for a call from Caldwell. He had been strangely quiet since their last meeting, and she couldn't decide if it was a good or bad thing. Either way, she needed to know where she stood. She answered the call. "Miss Collins," came Caldwell's smooth voice, as calculated as ever. "I trust you're doing well." "Doing well," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "What's the matter?" "I've been keeping tabs on your progress," Caldwell said, his tone laced with amusement. "I must say, I'm impressed. But there's one last thing you need to do before you truly prove your loyalty to me." Sarah's mind raced. She had already agreed to work with him, but she had no idea what he was asking of her now. "What is it?" "I want you to help me finalize the deal with Marcus," he said casually. "It's time to remove him from the equation for good." Her pulse quickened, and her stomach twisted in knots. It felt as though the floor had just dropped out beneath her. Marcus wasn't just a colleague anymore, he was someone she had once cared about, someone she had respected. But the weight of Caldwell's words was heavy, and there was no room for hesitation in this world. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Caldwell paused for a moment. "You know what needs to be done. You need to sever all ties with him, completely. Make sure he doesn't have any leverage. If you need to, you can make him disappear." The last part of the sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, and her breath caught in her throat. Disappear? That was a step she had never anticipated. She had been warned about the ruthless side of this world, but this was something else entirely. "I'll do it," she said, the words leaving her mouth before she could think better of it. It was as though her survival instincts had taken over, drowning out the moral objections screaming inside her. This was the path she had chosen. There was no turning back now. "Good," Caldwell said, his tone approving. "I'll give you the details soon. Don't disappoint me." As the line went dead, Sarah stood there, her heart pounding. The decision had been made. She was about to take another step into the darkness, and she wasn't sure if there was any light left at the end of the tunnel. The next day, Sarah met with one of Caldwell's associates, a man named Victor, at a secluded location. Victor was a cold, calculating individual who never smiled and never showed any sign of emotion. He was the kind of person who did what needed to be done without hesitation, and that was exactly why Caldwell trusted him. Sarah was prepared to hear that Victor had the plan already in motion, that he had everything set up. But what she wasn't prepared for was the calm, methodical way in which Victor spoke about Marcus's removal. "We've got everything we need," Victor said, pushing a folder toward her. "The information you've given us about Marcus's habits and whereabouts has been invaluable. We've been keeping track of him, and we know exactly when he'll be vulnerable. It's just a matter of execution." Sarah swallowed hard, staring at the folder. It felt like the weight of the world was resting on her shoulders, and the choice before her was too big to ignore. She had to play her part. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. She wasn't sure if she was asking Victor or herself, but it didn't matter. The question hung in the air, unspoken yet heavy with meaning. Victor didn't flinch. "It's the only way. You know how Caldwell operates. If Marcus is left alive, he'll become a threat to everything we've worked for. You have to do this, Sarah. For your own future." She nodded, her mind reeling as she processed the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a business decision anymore. This was personal. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Victor smiled then, but it wasn't a smile that brought any comfort. It was cold and detached, like he was simply going through the motions of a job. "Good. I'll be in touch with the specifics. Don't take too long." As Sarah left the meeting, she felt as though she were walking in a dream or maybe a nightmare. Everything seemed hazy, like the world around her had lost its clarity. She had just agreed to help Caldwell eliminate Marcus, someone she had once admired, someone she had called a friend. But now she was part of the machine. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Marcus, and for a brief moment, her heart clenched. She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. She hadn't spoken to him since that night in the park, and part of her had hoped he would never contact her again. But here it was, a message from him. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Sarah, but I won't let you go down this path alone. I'm here if you need me. She stared at the message, her heart breaking all over again. He hadn't given up on her. He hadn't written her off. But it was too late. She had already made her choice. With trembling hands, she deleted the message. And in doing so, she erased the last connection to the person she used to be. Sarah sat at her desk in the cold silence of her office, her mind a swirling storm of conflicting thoughts. The message from Marcus echoed in her mind, a bitter reminder of the person she had been before all of this began. She had deleted it without a second thought, yet the words, "I'm here if you need me," refused to leave her. But there was no turning back. She had made her choice. She had crossed a line, and there was no way to return to who she was before. As much as she tried to focus on her work, the weight of what she had agreed to with Caldwell loomed over her like an ominous cloud. The plan was set. The pieces were in motion. She had to follow through. Marcus had to be eliminated, or Caldwell would destroy her too. Victor had already provided her with the details. Marcus's routine was predictable. He liked to take late-night walks in the park, as he had always done since they first met. It was his way of clearing his mind, of dealing with the stress of the business world. Now, it would be his downfall. She could almost hear his voice in her head, asking her what she was doing. What had happened to the person who had cared about making the right decisions? The person who had once stood by his side, working for something greater than just personal gain? The person she had once been seemed so far removed now, it was like looking at a stranger from a distant memory. But she couldn't afford to dwell on that. Not now. The clock was ticking. As night fell, Sarah drove to the designated meeting point with Victor. The air was thick with tension, and her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, the sound of it growing louder with each passing second. She had been preparing for this moment for days, and now it was finally here. She pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a small cafe near the park, where Victor was waiting. He stood in the shadows, his face expressionless as usual. Sarah could feel her breath catch in her throat as she stepped out of the car and walked toward him. "Is it ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor nodded, handing her a small envelope. "Everything's in place. Marcus will be vulnerable tonight. He'll take his usual walk, and then it's over. You'll have your opportunity." Sarah took the envelope, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what was inside. She already knew what she had to do. The question was, could she really go through with it? Victor's eyes met hers, cold and unwavering. "No backing out now, Sarah. This is the final step. Make sure you don't screw it up." "I won't," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was lying to him or to herself. "I'll do it." With a stiff nod, Victor turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Sarah standing there, alone with her thoughts and the darkness that seemed to swallow her whole. It wasn't long before Sarah spotted Marcus in the distance. He was walking alone, just as she had known he would be. His shoulders were slumped, and his hands were stuffed deep in his jacket pockets as he walked along the narrow path through the park. The streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and the stillness of the night only added to the haunting quiet. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him, her mind racing. She had to do it. She had to follow through. She had made her decision, and this was the price she had to pay. But seeing him like this, so vulnerable, so unaware, made her hesitate. The man who had once trusted her completely, the man who had believed in her, was walking straight into the trap she had set for him. She had to stop herself from running to him, from calling his name, from telling him everything. But that wasn't an option anymore. She had already made her choice, and there was no undoing it. Sarah moved silently through the park, her feet barely making a sound on the gravel path. She had planned this moment carefully, but now that it was here, everything felt off. Her body screamed at her to turn back, to abandon this course of action and confess everything to Marcus, but she couldn't. She had gone too far. She couldn't show weakness now. As she drew closer, Sarah could see the pain etched into Marcus's face. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and melancholy, as though the weight of everything was finally catching up to him. He didn't see her approaching, and for a brief moment, she almost hoped he would. She wanted to tell him she was sorry. She wanted to beg him for forgiveness. But she couldn't. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a message from Victor. "Do it now. He's vulnerable." The words were simple, direct. And for the first time, they felt like a death sentence. Sarah stopped in her tracks, staring at the phone screen and the decision that lay before her. She had been given the chance to stop, to change her mind. But would it even matter? Would it change anything? She had been lured into this world of darkness, and now she had to face the consequences. She had no choice but to play her part. There was no turning back. With trembling hands, Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, concealed gun. The cold metal felt foreign in her grip, and her stomach twisted with nausea. She had never imagined her life would come to this, to standing in the shadows, aiming a weapon at someone she once called a friend. But that was the reality now. She couldn't afford to let herself think about it any longer. Marcus took another step forward, unaware of the danger that lurked just a few feet away. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her body refused to listen. "Sarah?" The voice came from behind her, low and calm. It was Marcus. And before she could react, his hand was on her shoulder, spinning her around. The gun fell from her grasp, clattering against the gravel. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked into his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was just disappointed. "I knew it," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the shock in his eyes. "I knew you were never really on my side." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The guilt, the pain, the regret, it all rushed to the surface at once, drowning her in its weight. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." He took a step back, shaking his head. "But you did, Sarah. You really did." And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't before: the price of ambition. The cost of making deals with the devil. She had lost everything. The air felt thick with regret, and Sarah could hardly breathe. Standing there in front of Marcus, with the gun still lying abandoned on the gravel path, every fiber of her being screamed for redemption. She had thought she could control this situation, that she could play the game, but now everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The man she had once cared about, the man she had trusted, was standing there, staring at her with a look of disbelief and heartbreak. She had betrayed him. "I never wanted this," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you, Marcus. I swear I didn't." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His eyes softened for a moment, but the pain behind them was palpable. He took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then why?" he finally asked, his voice strained, almost choking with emotion. "Why did you go through with it? Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Why did you let it all go this far?" Sarah shook her head, unable to find the words to explain the mess she had gotten herself into. She wanted to say something, to make it all right, but how could she? She had crossed the line. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The silence between them grew heavy, and it felt like time had come to a standstill. The world around them seemed distant, a blur of lights and shadows. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of the trees in the wind, but it was all just background noise. The only thing that mattered in that moment was Marcus's gaze, haunting, confused, and hurt. "I had to," she finally whispered, barely able to look at him. I thought it was the only way. They were going to take everything from me. I had no choice." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, his brows furrowing in confusion. "Who, Sarah? Who are you talking about?" She swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. She didn't want to drag him back into this world. She didn't want him to know how deep she had gotten, how far she had fallen. "It doesn't matter," she said, shaking her head again. "What matters is that I'm here now. And I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, Marcus. I don't know if I can." A long moment of silence passed between them before Marcus spoke again. "You know, I tried to protect you. I tried to warn you about this world. But you wouldn't listen. You were so caught up in the idea of success, of power, that you didn't see what it was doing to you. To us." His words stung, but they were the truth. She had been so focused on climbing the ladder, on achieving the life she had always dreamed of, that she had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. She had ignored the red flags, ignored the people who cared about her. And now here she was, standing in front of the only person who had ever truly understood her, and she had destroyed it all. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, the words a broken record. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Marcus sighed deeply, looking down at the ground for a moment. When he met her eyes again, there was no anger in them, only sadness. "It's too late for apologies now, Sarah. What's done is done." The weight of his words crushed her, and she took a step back, her mind spinning. He was right. There was no going back. "I have to go," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "I can't stay here. Not after everything that's happened." "Marcus, please," she said, reaching out toward him. "Don't leave like this. I need you, please, But he was already walking away, his footsteps soft but resolute. Sarah watched as he disappeared into the night, her heart breaking all over again. The days that followed felt like a blur. Sarah went through the motions, but nothing felt real anymore. Work was a distraction, but even that couldn't numb the ache in her chest. Every time she saw a text message or an email, her heart would skip a beat, hoping it was from Marcus. But it never was. Instead, there were messages from Caldwell. They were brief, clinical, just reminders that the plan was still in motion, that the business would proceed as usual. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered anymore. She had destroyed the one thing that had given her any real purpose, her relationship with Marcus. Victor continued to check in with her, ensuring that everything was moving forward as planned. But Sarah couldn't focus. She was distracted, her thoughts consumed by the decision she had made. How had she allowed herself to be pulled so far into Caldwell's world? She had once been strong, once had integrity. What had happened to her? She tried to convince herself that she was doing what needed to be done, that this was the only way to survive. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. She had let herself be manipulated, had let herself believe that success at any cost was worth it. And now she had lost everything. It was late one night when Sarah received an unexpected visitor. There was a knock on her door, soft at first, then louder. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should answer. Who would be at her door at this hour? But then she heard the familiar voice, and her heart stopped. "Sarah, open the door." It was Marcus. She rushed to the door, almost afraid that if she didn't open it quickly enough, he would disappear again. When she opened it, he was standing there, his face serious, but not angry. His expression was hard to read, but there was a glimmer of something, maybe hope? "Marcus," she breathed, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I've thought a lot about what happened," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did. But I also know that you're not the person who did it." "Not really." Sarah felt a rush of emotions flood through her: relief, confusion, guilt. She didn't deserve his forgiveness. Not after everything she had done. But he was giving her a chance. A chance to make things right. "I've been given a second chance, Marcus," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do anything. Please, just tell me what to do." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but determined. "We can start by taking down Caldwell." The realization hit Sarah like a wave, crashing over her and pulling her under. This wasn't over. She wasn't done yet. There was still a chance for redemption, for something better. And Marcus was offering her that chance. They had a long road ahead, and it wouldn't be easy, but together, they could fight back. Together, they could take down the very system she had helped build and rebuild what had been lost. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a spark of hope. A chance for a new beginning. The days after Marcus's visit felt surreal. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope break through the thick cloud of guilt and regret that had consumed her. The path she had chosen was dark, but it wasn't too late to turn things around. She wasn't alone anymore. Marcus was back in her life, and together, they had a chance to bring down Caldwell and the whole corrupt empire that had ensnared them both. But nothing would come easy. Caldwell had too much power, too many resources. And Victor would be a problem too. He had been the one who first pulled her into this mess, the one who had manipulated her with promises of wealth and power. There was no doubt in her mind that he would do whatever it took to protect his own interests. It was late one evening when Sarah and Marcus finally put their plan into motion. They sat together at her kitchen table, a map of Caldwell's operations spread out in front of them. Everything they needed to know was there. Every address, every phone number, every account that Caldwell controlled. It was all in front of them. The pieces were on the table, but the game wasn't over. They had to be careful, strategic. One wrong move, and it would all come crashing down. "So, here's the deal," Marcus said, his voice calm but determined. "We start with Caldwell's financial operations. If we hit him where it hurts, the rest of it will follow. We need to make sure he's exposed for what he really is. And we need to get Victor out of the picture for good." Sarah nodded, her mind working quickly as she analyzed the map. There were risks, of course. But if they could gather the right evidence and leak it to the right people, Caldwell's empire would crumble. The truth had a way of doing that. "What about Victor?" she asked, her eyes meeting Marcus's. "We can't ignore him. He's dangerous." Marcus's expression darkened. "I know. But we're not going to make the same mistake I made. This time, we're going to be smarter about it." The plan was set. The first step was to infiltrate Caldwell's most vulnerable spot, his financial accounts. Marcus had a contact in the financial world who owed him a favor, someone who could help them access critical data without raising alarms. Once they had that, they would have the evidence they needed to bring Caldwell down. But there was one major hurdle left: Victor. Victor had been close to Caldwell for years, and Sarah knew him too well. He wasn't just some hired hand. He was a mastermind, and he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who got in his way. They would have to be careful around him, especially since he had no idea that Sarah was planning to double-cross him. But what worried Sarah the most was the possibility that Victor might have already caught wind of her change in allegiance. He had always been perceptive, always one step ahead. If he suspected anything, it could mean the end of everything she and Marcus were working for. The next few days were a blur of late-night meetings, phone calls, and digital forensics. Marcus's contact had provided them with everything they needed to breach Caldwell's financial system. They were making progress, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was only after the third day of digging through financial documents that they found it, the smoking gun. Caldwell had been laundering money through several offshore accounts, hiding illegal transactions behind seemingly legitimate businesses. The information was damning. If they could get it into the right hands, it would bring Caldwell down once and for all. But there was no time to celebrate. They had a bigger problem to deal with. Sarah was sitting alone in her apartment, reviewing the files when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. She hesitated before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Sarah," came a low, gravelly voice. It was Victor. She froze, her mind racing. How did he know? "Where are you?" Victor asked, his tone icy. "I need to see you. It's important." Sarah's mind scrambled for an excuse. "I'm busy, Victor. I've been working on." "No," he interrupted sharply. "I'm coming over. You better be ready. We need to talk." The call ended abruptly, and Sarah's stomach churned with dread. She wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But there was no choice now. She had to face him. Minutes later, there was a knock at her door. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. When she opened it, Victor stood there, his dark eyes scanning her face, as if trying to gauge her every emotion. "Come in," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. Victor didn't waste any time. He walked past her, his presence suffocating, and took a seat at the kitchen table. His gaze never left her as he watched her closely, almost as if he could read her thoughts. "I know what you're up to," he said bluntly, his voice cold and unwavering. "I don't know who's been feeding you information, but I know you've been digging into Caldwell's finances. And I know you've been talking to Marcus. So, let's cut to the chase, Sarah. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to think fast. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety swirling inside her. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. I'm not doing anything illegal." Victor didn't buy it. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me. I know you better than anyone. You're in way over your head, and if you think you can just walk away from this, you're wrong. You're too deep, Sarah. You always were." She swallowed hard. He was right. She had been in too deep from the beginning. But she wasn't going to back down now. She couldn't. "I'm not backing down," Sarah said, her voice quiet but fierce. "And I'm not afraid of you." Victor's lips curled into a dark smile, but there was no humor in it. "You should be." There was a long, tense silence before he finally stood up, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've made a mistake, Sarah," he said ominously. "But you still have time to fix it. I'm giving you one chance. Back out now and everything will be fine. But if you don't, well, I don't think either of us will like the outcome." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Sarah standing there, trembling with fear and adrenaline. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Victor intimidate her. She had come too far. The game was on, and she was ready to play. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?